Boys sell books to help their mother, until the millionaire appears and changes their story. Brandon held the stack of books firmly, while Tyler arranged the volumes on the small wooden stool. The hot afternoon sun beat down on the streets of downtown New York City, but the two brothers refused to give up on the sale. They needed it to work so they could buy their mother's medicine. That's when a man in an impeccable suit stopped in front of them. Dr. Richard Thompson studied the boys with curiosity, especially the older one, who wore a worn-out cap and held the books as carefully as if they were treasures. "How much for this book?" Richard asked, pointing to a copy of American literature. Brandon glanced at Tyler before answering. His younger brother was only 10, but his eyes carried a maturity that didn't match his age. $5, sir," Brandon said, trying to sound confident. "But it's in great condition. We take good care of all our books." Richard picked up the book and flipped through a few pages. The cover was a little worn, but the content was intact. There was something about the boy's dedication that intrigued him. "Do you do this every day?" he asked. "Not every day, sir," Tyler replied, adjusting another stack of books. "Only when my mom needs medicine. She's sick, and the medicine is expensive." Brandon nudged his brother discreetly. They had agreed not to talk too much about their family struggles with customers. Sometimes people felt sorry for them, but that didn't guarantee they'd buy anything. Richard noticed the gesture and felt something tighten in his chest. There was a real story here, a real need behind this makeshift sidewalk sale. "What kind of illness does your mother have?" he pressed. The brothers exchanged another glance. Brandon took a deep breath before answering. "She has something wrong with her heart, sir. The doctor said she needs surgery, but it's too expensive. For now, she takes medicine so it doesn't get worse." "And where do you get these books to sell?" "We get them in different ways," Brandon explained. "Sometimes people donate them. Sometimes we trade ones we've already read. My mom always said books are the most valuable thing in the world." Richard smiled faintly. That phrase reminded him of something his own mother used to say decades ago, back when he was still a poor boy in rural Pennsylvania. "Do you go to school?" "Of course," Tyler answered quickly. "My mom doesn't let us skip. She always says education is the one thing no one can take from us." "We only sell books after school and on weekends," Brandon added. Richard bought 3 books, paying $20 and refusing the change. The boys tried to insist, but he was already walking away when Tyler called out, "Sir, wait, your change." "Keep it," Richard said, turning briefly. "Buy yourselves something nice to eat." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Brandon and Tyler stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching the man in the suit disappear into the crowd. They had never sold 3 books at once before, let alone to someone who left them extra money. "We should have asked his name," Tyler said. "Why?" "I don't know. He seemed different from the others." Brandon carefully tucked the money into his shirt pocket. With that $20, they could buy at least a week's worth of medicine for their mom. It was more than they'd ever made in a single day. The brothers lived with their mother, Grace, in a small rented house in Jackson Heights. Their father had left when Tyler was still a baby, and since then, Grace had raised them alone, working as an overnight office cleaner. The illness had started 6 months ago. At first it was just some chest pains she ignored, saying it was fatigue from the heavy workload. But when she began fainting, Brandon insisted she see a doctor. The diagnosis hit the whole family like a punch to the gut. Grace needed heart surgery that cost over $50,000. Her work insurance didn't cover that kind of procedure, and the public healthcare system had a waiting list of more than 2 years. That's when Brandon got the idea to sell books. He had always been a good student and loved reading. He knew the value of books and that there were people willing to buy them, especially downtown where many students and professionals passed by. When they got home that afternoon, they found Grace lying on the couch, her hand on her chest. She'd had another episode during the day but didn't want to worry the boys by calling the school. "Mom, did you take your medicine today?" Brandon asked, concerned. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm just a little tired." Tyler ran to the kitchen and came back with a glass of water. "We sold 3 books today, Mom. The man even gave us change." Grace smiled, but Brandon noticed how much effort even that simple gesture seemed to take. "That's wonderful, my loves. You're my little warriors." That night, after their mother went to sleep, Brandon stayed up doing calculations in an old notebook. At $20 a day, it would take nearly 3 years to save up for the surgery. And that was if they managed to sell every single day, which was impossible. He looked over at Tyler, asleep in the bed beside him, and felt the weight of responsibility. As the older brother, he had to find a solution. He couldn't let their mother suffer like this. The next morning, the brothers were back downtown, this time with a different selection of books. Brandon had picked titles he thought would be more appealing: romance novels, self-help books, and some classics of American literature. Business was slow. 3 hours passed and they'd only sold one book for $3. Tyler was starting to lose hope when he noticed an elderly woman approaching. "Good morning, dears," said the woman, who looked to be about 65. "Do you have any cookbooks?" "No, ma'am," Brandon replied politely. "We only have literature and some self-help books." The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Jenkins, examined the books with interest. She had lived in the neighborhood for over 40 years and knew all the families in the area. "Aren't you Grace's boys?" "Yes, Mum. You know our mum?" "Of course I do. She worked cleaning the building where my daughter lived for years." "How is she?" Brandon hesitated before answering. He wasn't sure if he should tell a stranger about their mother's illness, but there was something maternal about Mrs. Jenkins that made him trust her. "She's sick, Mum. Heart trouble." "Oh dear. Poor Grace. She's always been such a hard worker, so devoted to her boys." Mrs. Jenkins bought 2 books, but before leaving, she gave them advice that would change everything. "You know, there's a law that requires companies to allocate part of their taxes to social projects, right? Maybe you could ask a big company for help." Brandon had never heard of this, but he made a mental note. When he got home, he looked it up on the school's internet and found out Mrs. Jenkins was right. Over the next few days, Brandon came up with a plan. He would write a letter explaining their family's situation and deliver it in person to companies downtown. Tyler thought it was a waste of time, but Brandon was determined. The first place they visited was a law firm. The receptionist barely glanced at the letter and said they didn't get involved with that kind of matter. The second stop was a tech company, where they couldn't even get past the front desk. Brandon was starting to lose hope when he remembered the man in the suit who had bought the books a few days earlier. There was something different about him, a genuine kindness that set him apart from the others. "Tyler, let's go back to the spot where we sold books to that man. Maybe he'll show up again." But Brandon, New York City is huge. The chance of running into him again is almost zero. Maybe, but it's worth a try. The brothers started frequenting the same spot, hoping to see the mysterious man again. A week passed with no luck. The books still weren't selling much, and Grace's condition was getting worse. One afternoon, just as they were about to give up and head home, Brandon spotted a familiar figure walking toward them. It was the man in the suit with the same elegant posture and serious expression. "Tyler, it's him, the man who bought the books." Richard Thompson had thought about the boys several times that week. Something about their encounter bothered him, as if there were a deeper connection he couldn't quite place. That's why he decided to return to that spot during his lunch break. "Hello, boys. How's the selling going?" "Pretty slow, sir," Brandon answered honestly. "But we're not giving up." "And your mother? How is she?" Tyler lowered his head. Grace's condition had worsened considerably in the last few days. She could barely get out of bed, and the medicine seemed less and less effective. "Not too good, sir. She really needs the surgery soon." Richard felt that tightness in his chest again. There was something about these boys that moved him deeply, but he couldn't pinpoint what. "What are your full names?" "I'm Brandon Williams, and this is my brother, Tyler Williams. Our mother is Grace Williams." Richard froze. Williams. That last name stirred an old memory, buried for decades in some forgotten corner of his mind. "Grace Williams," he murmured more to himself than to the boys. "Do you know our mother?" Brandon asked, surprised. Richard didn't answer right away. His mind was traveling back in time to when he was just a poor boy in a small town in Pennsylvania. There was a girl at school a few years younger than him. who always stood up for him when the other kids mocked his patched clothes and worn-out shoes. Her name was Grace Williams. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out as we're just starting. Now, back to the story. You said your mother always talked about the importance of books, didn't you? Richard asked, his voice slightly shaky. Yes, sir, she always says books are the most valuable thing in the world, Tyler confirmed. Richard closed his eyes for a moment. That was exactly what Grace from school used to say. She'd lend him books when he couldn't afford to buy them, always repeating that phrase. Can I talk to your mother? Brandon and Tyler exchanged confused glances. Why would this wealthy man want to speak to their mother? Of course, sir, but she's very weak. I'm not sure she'll be up for visitors. I understand, but it's very important. The brothers led Richard to their home later that afternoon. On the way, he tried to sort through the flood of memories rushing back to him. Grace was lying on the couch when they arrived. She was pale and breathing heavily, but insisted on sitting up when she saw her sons had brought a guest. Mum, this is the man who bought the boys' books, Brandon said. Grace looked at Richard, and her features slowly transformed. It was as if she were seeing a ghost from the past. Richard Thompson? Grace Williams. After all these years, the two stared at each other in silence for long seconds. Brandon and Tyler didn't understand what was happening. Do you know each other? Tyler asked. We do, Grace said, tears in her eyes. Richard studied with me when we were children in Scranton. He was the smartest boy in school. And Grace was the kindest person I ever knew, Richard added. She lent me books, stood up for me against the other boys, and always believed I'd make something of myself. Brandon began to grasp the situation. This wealthy man had been friends with his mother when they were both poor children. What happened? Why did you lose touch? He asked. My family moved to New York City when I was 14, Richard explained. My father found work here and promised I'd come back to visit, but life kept moving and I married young, had you two, and never left Pennsylvania until we came to New York 10 years ago, Grace finished. Richard stepped closer and took his old friend's hands. They were cold and trembling. Grace, I became a businessman. I own a construction company, and I can pay for your surgery. It's not a favor. It's what any friend would do. Richard, I can't accept. It's too much money. You can and you will. You helped me when I needed it. Now it's my turn to return the favor. Brandon felt tears streaming down his face. After so many days of struggle and worry, there was finally light at the end of the tunnel. Mom, please, for heaven's sake, accept, Tyler pleaded. Grace looked at her sons, then at Richard. Her eyes held so much exhaustion, so much accumulated hardship. All right, she whispered. I accept. Richard scheduled the surgery for the following week at one of New York City's best hospitals. Grace would be operated on by a team of renowned surgeons, with all the care and technology available. In the days leading up to the surgery, Richard visited the family daily. He brought food, medicine, and most of all, hope. The boys stopped selling books and could focus solely on caring for their mother and studying. Richard, why did you never marry? Grace asked during one of these visits. I never found anyone like you, he answered honestly. I always compared every woman to that generous girl from school who lent me books. Grace smiled weakly. That's silly. I was just a child. You were a special child, and you became an even more special woman. Look at the sons you raised. The night before the surgery, Richard couldn't sleep. He paced back and forth in his luxurious apartment, thinking about how unpredictable life was. A week ago, he was just a successful but lonely businessman. Now he had rediscovered the love of his childhood and found he had a family. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Richard waited at the hospital with Brandon and Tyler, who could barely sit still from anxiety. Mrs. Jenkins also came to offer support, bringing sandwiches and coffee for everyone. Dr. Thompson, Tyler said, using the formal address he'd learned from his mother. Do you think everything will be all right? It will, Tyler. Your mother is a strong woman. She won't give up now. When the surgeon finally came out of the operating room, everyone stood at once. The surgery was a success, he announced. The patient is stable and should make a full recovery. Brandon and Tyler hugged each other, crying with relief. Richard felt as if a decades-old weight had lifted from his shoulders. Grace stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks. During that time, Richard organized the family's entire life. He rented a larger, more comfortable house, enrolled the boys in a private school, and hired a nurse to oversee Grace's recovery. "Richard, this is too much," she protested when she learned about all the changes. "Grace, I spent 40 years of my life searching for you without even knowing I was searching. Now that I've found you, I won't let you slip away again. But I'm a simple woman with 2 children. You're a wealthy, successful man. And I'm still that poor boy you defended in school. Money hasn't changed who I am inside." Brandon listened from the bedroom door and smiled. He could see there was something special between his mother and Richard, something beyond gratitude. Grace's recovery was gradual but steady. Each day she grew stronger, more like the cheerful woman her children remembered before her illness. Richard visited daily, always bringing flowers or a small gift. He loved hearing Grace's stories about raising the boys alone, the hardships they faced, and the dreams she had for their future. "You know what impresses me most about you?" he said one afternoon. "What?" "How you raised 2 such polite, honest, and determined boys. When I saw them selling books on the street, it wasn't just for money, it was to help you. That says everything about the mother you are. I always tried to teach them that no matter how hard life gets, we can always choose to do what's right. That's exactly what you taught me when we were kids." 2 months after the surgery, Grace was fully recovered. The doctor said her heart was working perfectly and she could live a normal life. That's when Richard made a decision he'd been considering for weeks. "Grace, I have a proposal for you." "What kind of proposal?" "Marry me." Grace nearly dropped her coffee cup. "Richard, have you lost your mind? I've never been clearer in my life. I've loved you since we were children. I spent my whole life searching for you without knowing it. Now that I've found you, I don't want to waste any more time." "But Richard..." "Grace, it doesn't matter that we're different now. What matters is that when I'm with you, I feel whole. And I know you feel something similar." Grace looked at her sons, who watched with curiosity and hope. "What do you think?" she asked. "Mom, you should marry Dr. Richard," Tyler said immediately. "He really cares about you, and you're happy when he's here." "Brandon, what do you think?" Brandon thought for a moment before answering. "Mom, Mr. Richard isn't just some rich man who showed up to help us. He's someone who makes you smile again. I haven't seen you smile like that since before you got sick." Tears welled in Grace's eyes. Her sons were right. Richard hadn't just saved her life. He'd brought back the joy she thought she'd lost forever. "All right," she said, reaching for Richard's hand. "I accept." The wedding was simple but heartfelt, held at the neighborhood church where Grace lived, with Mrs. Jenkins, a few neighbors, and friends in attendance. Brandon and Tyler stood proudly as best men, overjoyed to see their mother so happy. Richard didn't just marry Grace, he officially adopted Brandon and Tyler, giving them his last name and all the love of a father who'd always wanted children. "Now you're officially my sons," he said on adoption day. "And I want you to know, you couldn't have a prouder father." The new family moved into a spacious home in an upscale New York City neighborhood. Brandon and Tyler continued at their private school, where they excelled as bright students. Grace went back to work, but now as a social project administrator at Richard's company. "You know what's ironic?" Richard said to Grace a few months after the wedding. "What?" "I spent years donating to charities, trying to help underprivileged kids, and the children who really needed my help were selling books right outside my office." "Maybe it's not irony," Grace replied. "Maybe it's fate." Brandon and Tyler adjusted well to their new life, but never forgot where they came from. They convinced Richard to start a social project at his company, a mobile library that visited underserved communities, giving out free books to children. "The idea is our way of giving back," Brandon explained. "We want other kids to have access to books like we did." The project was a huge success. In no time, the mobile library was visiting public schools all over the New York City metropolitan area, distributing thousands of books every month. Mrs. Jenkins, who had become like a grandmother to the family, Always said the story proved God never forgets anyone. Did you see how it works? She'd tell the neighbors. Grace helped that boy when they were kids, expecting nothing in return. 40 years later, he comes back to repay her. That's called gratitude. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out as we're just starting. Now, continuing. A year after the wedding, the family received news that would change their lives once again. Grace was pregnant. At 42, she asked in disbelief, holding the test in her hand. The doctor said it's perfectly normal, Richard reassured her. Your heart is strong, you're healthy, there's no risk. Brandon and Tyler were thrilled. They'd always wanted a younger sibling. We'll teach them everything, Tyler said. How to read, how to play ball, how to sell books if they have to. They won't need to sell books, Richard laughed, but the rest, sure, go ahead. During the pregnancy, Grace seemed to glow even brighter. It was as if late motherhood had brought renewed energy to her life. Richard never tired of caring for her, always attentive to her every need. Remember when we were kids and you said you wanted lots of children? He asked one afternoon, gently touching her belly. I do. And you said you wanted to be rich so you could take good care of your family. We ended up getting both wishes. We really did, and in a way we never imagined. The birth of little Emily was pure joy for the whole family. Brandon and Tyler took turns helping with their sister, and Richard discovered that being a father at 50 was even more rewarding than he'd thought. She has her mother's eyes, Mrs. Jenkins observed when visiting them at the hospital. And her father's smile, Grace added, watching Richard make funny faces at the baby. Life changed completely with Emily's arrival. Their once quiet, organized home became full of life, baby cries, laughter, and the constant bustle of a big family. Brandon, now 16, excelled in school and talked about studying medicine. He wanted to be a cardiologist to help others the way his mother had been helped. It's my way of giving back, he explained. If it weren't for Mr. Richard, my mom wouldn't be here today to take care of Emily. 13-year-old Tyler showed a knack for business. He'd started a small book-selling project at school, donating part of the profits to the family's mobile library. He's going to be an entrepreneur like his father, Grace said proudly. Only if they want to, Richard would reply. I want them to choose their own careers without pressure. Richard's company grew every year, and he credited much of his success to the emotional stability he found with his family. Having Grace by his side as a partner in their social projects brought a humanized perspective to the business. You've made me a better businessman, he told his wife. Before I only thought about profit. Now I think about the people who work with me and the communities we can help. The mobile library project had expanded so much that it became an independent organization with its own resources and a team of volunteers. Brandon and Tyler actively participated, visiting schools on weekends to tell stories and encourage reading. It's amazing how it all started with us selling books on the street, Brandon reflected during one of these visits. And now we're giving books away for free, Tyler added. Life really comes full circle. 5 years had passed since Richard and Grace reunited. Emily was growing up surrounded by love and opportunities. Brandon had entered medical school on a full scholarship, and Tyler was preparing for college entrance exams. During Emily's birthday party, Mrs. Jenkins gave a speech that moved the whole family. I've had the privilege of witnessing one of the most beautiful stories I've ever seen, she said. I watched 2 boys fighting to save their mother, a man reuniting with his great love, and a family forming in the most unlikely way. And it's not over yet, Richard added. We still have many years ahead to create more memories together. Grace looked around the room, seeing her happy children, the husband she loved, and her little girl playing in her older brother's lap. It was hard to believe that just a few years earlier, she had been sick, without money for treatment, and afraid of leaving her children orphaned. You know what I've learned from all this? She said to Richard that night, after everyone had gone to bed. What? That sometimes life tests us to see if we're ready for the blessings it has in store. How so? I went through so many hardships raising Brandon and Tyler alone. I had to be strong, work hard, and teach my boys to be honest and determined. If I hadn't gone through all that, maybe I wouldn't have been ready for all the good that came after." Richard hugged his wife tenderly. "And I spent 40 years building a company and saving money without knowing why. Now I know. It was so I could take care of you when I found you. Do you think if we had reunited when we were young, it would have worked? I don't know. Maybe not. I was too ambitious, and you were focused on raising your boys. Maybe we needed to go through everything we did to get here mature enough to appreciate what we have." The following year, the family decided to take a special trip. They returned to Scranton, Pennsylvania, to visit the school where Richard and Grace had met decades earlier. The school still stood, though it had been renovated many times. The current principal, a kind woman named Principal Anderson, was charmed by the couple's story. "Would you like to speak to our students?" she suggested. "It's an inspiring story about how education and kindness can change lives." Brandon and Tyler loved the idea. They told the children how education had transformed their lives and how books remained their best friends. "Never give up on studying," Brandon told a group of elementary students. "No matter how hard things get, education is the one thing no one can take from you. And always be kind to each other," Tyler added. "You never know how a simple gesture can change someone's life." Richard and Grace visited the classroom where they studied together as children. It was smaller than they remembered, but the old wooden desks were still there, filled with stories and memories. "It was in this room that you lent me my first book," Richard recalled, "The Little Prince." "You returned it 3 days later, so careful with it, as if it were made of gold." To me, it was. It was the first book someone ever trusted me to take good care of. They left a significant donation for the school and promised to return every year to support the educational projects. Back in New York City, the family's life remained prosperous and happy. Brandon excelled in medical school and was already interning at a prestigious hospital. Tyler had decided to study business administration to one day take over the family company, but with a focus on social responsibility. Emily, at 5 years old, was already showing signs of the intelligence and determination that ran in the family. She loved books and often asked her brothers to tell her stories. "Daddy, why did you and Mommy meet when you were little, but only got married when you were grown up?" she asked one night during bedtime reading. Richard smiled, searching for an explanation a 5-year-old could understand. "Sometimes people need to grow up and learn many things before they're ready to start a family," he explained. "And were you ready when I was born?" "We were ready when your brother Brandon started selling books to help your mother. That's when we realized it was time to find each other again." Grace listened from the doorway and smiled. It was amazing how a child could simplify such complex matters. Richard's company had become one of the most respected in the country in the construction industry, but also in social work. The mobile library project had inspired other initiatives like a technical school for underprivileged youth and a university scholarship program. "Do you know what makes me proudest about our company?" Richard would say during board meetings. "It's not the buildings we construct, it's the lives we help transform." Grace had become a reference in social project management. She was often invited to give talks and consult for other companies wanting to implement similar programs. "How do you balance personal life with so much work?" someone once asked during one of these talks. "I don't work," she replied. "I make dreams come true. When you do what you love, with people you love, work becomes joy." Brandon graduated from medical school with honors and was accepted into a cardiology residency program at the same hospital where his mother had been treated. It was a symbolic way to close a circle. "Dr. Brandon Williams Thompson," Richard said proudly on graduation day. "Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" "It does, Dad, and I hope to live up to the name you gave me." Tyler graduated with a business degree and began working in the family company, but implementing his own innovative ideas. He created an app connecting book donors with institutions in need, expanding the mobile library concept into the digital world. "It's the natural evolution of the project," he explained. "Now, anyone anywhere in the United States can donate books to a school in need." The app was an instant success, downloaded by thousands across the country. Tyler was invited to speak at universities about social entrepreneurship. Emily, at 10 years old, was already showing interest in the family's projects. She joined school visits and loved helping distribute books. "When I grow up, I want to have a company that helps children like you helped Daddy when he was little," she said during one of those visits. "And we'll help you make that dream come true," Grace promised. The family decided to formalize all their social activities by creating an official foundation. The Williams Thompson Foundation became responsible for all social projects, with Grace as president and Tyler as technology director. "It's amazing how everything started with two boys selling books on the street," reflected Mrs. Jenkins, who at 75 remained a constant presence in the family's life. "And now we have a foundation that serves over 100 schools a year," added Brandon. "It shows that no act of kindness is too small," said Richard. "If it's done with sincerity, it can grow and touch thousands of lives." 10 years had passed since that first meeting on the sidewalk. Brandon was now a respected cardiologist, Tyler had expanded the family business to other states, and Emily showed signs of following in her brother's footsteps in social work. During a family meeting to plan the next year's projects, Emily made a surprising suggestion. "Why don't we go back to selling books on the street?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Grace asked. "We could organize an event where people sell books on the street and the money goes to the foundation. It would be a way to remember how it all started." Emily's idea was implemented and became an annual event. Book Sale Day took place simultaneously in cities across the country, with volunteers selling books on the streets and donating the proceeds to educational projects. The first event raised over $500,000 in a single day. Brandon and Tyler organized the sales in the capital, while Emily, though still a child, became the event's official mascot. "Who would have thought two boys selling books on Fifth Avenue would turn into a national movement?" remarked a journalist covering the event. "It's proof that big changes start with small acts," Grace replied. At 60, Richard began thinking about retirement, but couldn't imagine life without the social projects that had become his passion. "I'll keep working until my last day," he said. "Not in construction projects, but in projects that build people." Brandon married a fellow doctor and they had twins. Tyler met a young human rights lawyer and started a family of his own. Emily, at 15, was already fluent in 3 languages and dreamed of studying international relations to expand the foundation's work to other countries. "Our family is growing," Grace observed during a family gathering. "And so are the projects," Richard added. "We're already discussing bringing the mobile library to countries in Latin America." The family home had become a meeting place for people involved in social projects. Educators, social entrepreneurs, and students often visited to learn about the foundation's work firsthand. Mrs. Jenkins, now 80, remained actively involved in all activities. She had become the family's unofficial advisor. "Do you know the secret to your success?" she asked during one of these gatherings. "What?" they all asked in unison. "You never forgot where you came from. No matter how successful you've become, you always remember those two boys selling books on the street." It was true. Despite their prosperity, the family kept the simplicity and humility that had always defined them. The children were raised to appreciate what they had and to always think of ways to help others. During the 15th anniversary of the foundation, the family decided to reflect on everything they had achieved. The numbers were impressive. Over 1 million books distributed, 200 schools regularly supported, 500 young people benefiting from scholarships. "But what makes me proudest," Grace said during the anniversary speech, "isn't the numbers. It's the lives we've changed. Every child who learned to read, every young person who got an opportunity, every family whose life improved." Brandon, now a family man and a respected doctor, still got emotional when he remembered the days he sold books on the street. "I always tell my kids how it all started," he said. "I want them to understand that no matter how hard things get, there's always a way if you don't give up." Tyler had become a respected businessman, but always prioritized social projects over profit. "My father taught me that money is just a tool," he explained to other entrepreneurs. "What matters is how you use it." Emily, at 20, was graduating with a degree in international relations and had already secured partnerships to bring the foundation's projects to 5 countries in Latin America. "It's amazing to see the seed you planted growing in places you never imagined," she told her parents. Richard, at 65, had officially retired from the construction business, but remained active in the foundation. He and Grace traveled across the country, visiting projects and meeting the communities they served. "This is the best time of my life," he said. "I have the family I always dreamed of, and I'm making a difference in people's lives." Grace, at 57, was more radiant than ever. Her heart condition was just a distant memory, and she devoted herself fully to social projects and her family. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I hadn't gotten sick," she reflected. "We'd probably just be an ordinary family," Richard replied. "It was hardship that brought us together and gave us purpose." During a visit to a rural school in Pennsylvania, the family encountered a situation that deeply moved them. Two brothers, around the same age Brandon and Tyler had been when they started selling books, were skipping school to work and help their family. "It's like looking into the past," Tyler whispered to Brandon. "We have to help," Brandon replied immediately. The family decided to adopt that community as a special project. They created an assistance program for the most vulnerable families, allowing children to return to school without their families losing income. "Every child we help is a victory against inequality," Emily said during project presentations. The program was so successful it became a model for other regions. In 5 years, over 2,000 children benefited, able to study instead of work. Mrs. Jenkins, now 85 but still sharp and active, insisted on attending the opening of the 100th school supported by the foundation. "I want to live to see 1,000 schools," she joked. "You will," Grace assured her, "and we'll reach that number together." Brandon had become head of the cardiology department at his hospital and implemented a free surgery program for those in need, inspired by his mother's experience. "Every life we save is a family that stays together," he explained to the residents. Tyler expanded his company into other sectors while keeping a focus on social responsibility. He created the concept of a citizen company, where employees dedicated weekly hours to community projects. "Making money isn't enough," he said. "We have to give back to the society that gave us opportunities." Emily graduated with honors and was accepted into a master's program in international cooperation. Her research project focused on how local initiatives can transform into global movements. "I'm studying our own history," she joked, "how two boys selling books in New York City became a movement serving children in multiple countries." On the 20th anniversary of Richard and Grace's reunion, the family organized a grand celebration. Everyone who had been part of their journey was invited: doctors, teachers, beneficiaries of their projects, and hundreds of volunteers. 20 years have passed since two boys touched my arm on the street and changed my life forever," Richard said during his speech. "And they changed the lives of thousands of others too," Grace added. Brandon, now a father of 3, continued sharing the family's story with the younger generations. "Dad, is it true that Grandpa met Grandma when they were selling books on the street?" asked his oldest son. "No, son. They met in school when they were kids. Then they lost touch and found each other again when Uncle Tyler and I were selling books on the street." "And why were you selling books?" "To help Grandma, who was sick and needed an expensive surgery." "And then Grandpa Richard showed up and saved everyone?" "Yes, but the most important thing is that they saved each other. Grandpa was lonely and sad, and we needed help. When we found each other, we became a family." The children were always fascinated by the story, especially the part about the books. The family kept the tradition of gifting each child books on every special occasion. Tyler had developed an innovative book distribution technique using drones to reach remote communities. The pilot project was being tested in Appalachia, delivering books to children in riverine areas. "It's the evolution of the mobile library," he explained. "Now we can reach places no vehicle can go." Emily was finishing her master's and had already received job offers from international organizations. She planned to spend a few years abroad to learn about global cooperation, but always intended to return and expand the family's projects. "The world needs to know about the work you've done," she said. "It's a model that can be replicated anywhere." Grace and Richard, now in their 60s, were more in love than ever. They traveled together to visit their projects, often holding hands during school visits. "You two still act like teenagers," Emily teased. "That's because we still are," Richard replied. "Just teenagers who've been together for 40 years. The foundation had grown so much that it needed its own headquarters. The building was constructed sustainably and served as a model for other organizations. The ground floor housed a public library, and the top floor featured a museum telling the family's story and showcasing their projects. "It's important for people to know how it all began," Grace said during the opening. "Two kids selling books on the street can change the world if they have determination and find people willing to help." Mrs. Jenkins, now in her 90s, still participated in the foundation's activities. She had become a symbol of wisdom for the entire organization. "Mrs. Jenkins, what's the secret to a long and happy life?" someone asked during an interview. "Being useful to others," she answered without hesitation. "When you live to help, you find purpose in every day." The mobile library project had expanded to 15 countries in Latin America and was being considered for implementation in Africa. Emily, who spoke 4 languages, was coordinating these international expansions. "Every country has its unique characteristics," she explained, "but the need for education is universal." Brandon had implemented a telemedicine program that served rural communities, allowing cardiology specialists to treat patients in remote areas. "Technology in service of life," he summarized. "That's how we like to work." During the Foundation's 25th anniversary, the family reflected on their impressive achievements. Over 5 million books distributed, 1,000 schools supported, 5,000 young people granted scholarships, and projects in 20 countries. "But do you know the statistic I'm most proud of?" Grace asked during the ceremony. "What?" the audience responded. "Zero. 0 families who asked for our help and didn't receive it. We always found a way." The family's story had become an inspiration for books, documentaries, and even a television series. They always authorized the use of their story, but with one condition. Part of the proceeds had to go toward educational projects. "Our story doesn't belong to us," Richard said. "It belongs to everyone who believes the world can be changed through education and kindness." Brandon had become president of the American Society of Cardiology and used his position to promote prevention programs in underserved communities. "Heart disease can be avoided with information and basic care," he explained. "Prevention is cheaper than treatment." Tyler had built a network of social enterprises that employed thousands of people, always keeping social responsibility at the forefront. He became a leader in conscious entrepreneurship. "Profit and social purpose aren't incompatible," he argued. "You can make money while doing good." Emily had completed her master's with a thesis on micro-initiatives with global impact and was starting a PhD in international cooperation. Her goal was to systematize the family's model so it could be replicated worldwide. "I want other families to have the opportunity we did," she said, "to turn hardship into a chance to help thousands." For the 30th anniversary of their reunion, the family organized a global celebration. Simultaneous events took place in every country where the foundation worked, featuring free book distributions and cultural performances. 30 years ago, I was just a successful but lonely businessman," Richard said during the main event. "Today, I'm a fulfilled man with a wonderful family, part of a project that touches millions of lives." "And I was a single mother, sick and without hope," Grace added. "Today I'm whole, surrounded by love and living dreams I didn't even know I had." The celebration lasted a week, with representatives from every country they served in attendance. Children who had benefited from the first projects, now adults, returned to share how their lives had changed. "I learned to read with the Foundation's books," said one young woman, now a teacher. "And today I teach other children to read. It's a cycle that never stops." Brandon had developed an innovative surgical technique for correcting congenital heart defects and was training doctors in developing countries. "Medical knowledge should be shared," he insisted. "No matter where a child is born, they deserve the best treatment available." Tyler had created a social investment fund that financed purpose-driven businesses across Latin America. The fund had already invested in hundreds of projects, generating thousands of jobs. "Money is like a seed," he explained. "It only has value if planted to bear fruit." Emily had created a digital platform that connected social organizations from around the world, allowing the sharing of experiences and resources. "We live in the age of connectivity," she would say. "It's only natural that social organizations also connect to amplify their impact." Mrs. Jenkins, at 95 years old, continued to participate in the foundation's activities with the same energy as always. She had become a kind of matriarch for the entire organization. "Mrs. Jenkins, don't you ever get tired?" the younger volunteers would ask. "Tired of doing good?" "Impossible," she'd reply. "What's tiring is having no purpose in life." The family's story had inspired the creation of hundreds of similar organizations around the world. Grace and Richard received letters from people who had started their own social projects inspired by their journey. "It's amazing how one story can inspire so many others," Grace reflected. "Every person who decided to help someone because of our story has multiplied our impact." During an international conference on education, Emily presented a study showing how local initiatives could solve global problems. The solution to humanity's biggest challenges doesn't necessarily lie in large organizations or governments, she argued. It lies in the ability of ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Brandon had been honored by the US government for his contributions to social medicine and continued to provide free care in underserved communities. "Medicine is a calling," he'd say. "Those privileged to save lives have an obligation to use that gift to help those most in need." Tyler was being considered for an international award in social entrepreneurship. His network of businesses had become a model for sustainability and social responsibility. "Awards are important to bring visibility to the work," he remarked, "but the real reward is in the lives we manage to change." On the 35th anniversary of their reunion, the family received a special tribute from international organizations for their contributions to global education. It was recognition that a project started by two boys selling books on the street had grown into a worldwide movement. "This award isn't ours," Grace said during the ceremony in Geneva. "It belongs to everyone who believed it was possible to change the world through small acts of kindness." The foundation had reached impressive milestones: 10 million books distributed, 3,000 schools supported, 100,000 young people helped, and a presence in 50 countries. "But what makes us proudest," Richard added, "is knowing we've created a movement that no longer depends on us. Even if we stop tomorrow, thousands of people will keep these projects going." Emily had completed her doctorate and was working as a consultant for the World Education Council, implementing educational projects in developing countries. "I carry our family's experience everywhere I go," she said. "Every project I help implement carries a little of your wisdom." Brandon had founded a medical school specializing in social medicine, training doctors with social awareness and a commitment to underserved communities. "Here it's not enough to be a good doctor," he taught his students. "You must be a citizen doctor dedicated to social change." Tyler was expanding his businesses into Africa, always focusing on job creation and local community development. "Business can be a powerful tool for social transformation," he maintained. "It's all about choosing the right purpose." During a family meeting, they decided to create a lasting legacy, a university dedicated to training leaders in social development. The campus would be built in Scranton, the town where it all began. "It's a way to come full circle," Grace explained. "We started as two poor kids in Scranton, and now we're going to help other children there have opportunities we never had." The university would be free and focused on training professionals committed to social change. The programs would include social administration, community medicine, inclusive education, and sustainable development. Mrs. Jenkins, at 100 years old and still sharp, was chosen to be the first honorary chancellor of the university. "100 years of life have taught me that education is the only way to break the cycle of poverty," she said during the project's launch ceremony. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this touching story. Do you believe small gestures can really transform lives like they did for Brandon and Tyler? Leave your honest opinion in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one.